All right, hello ATM. Today you are going to watch a video on 2-2, the class portion. It's fairly short, so I don't anticipate it taking too long. But if you want to follow along in your textbook, we're going to be on page 167. Page 167. So the very first question, it says, first let's talk about variables. Answer this question honestly and to the best of your ability without any outside help. What is a variable? That's not really an answer, or it's not something I can give you because it wants you to answer based on your ability. But I am going to put that a common answer is the letter X. We're used to using X for the most part. I'm going to go ahead and read through this paragraph. If you're like most people, your answer was probably something like this. A variable is a letter instead of a number. I am very sorry to inform you that, and I say this in the most caring possible way, your answer stinks. Think about that. Think about what the word variable should mean in plain English. Able to vary. And that is the key to understanding variables. Here's the actual definition. A variable is a quantity that is able to change or vary. Contrast this with a constant, which can't vary. The number 12 is a constant because no matter what, it still has the same value. The number of hours you spend studying, on the other hand, is a variable because it can vary according to how much effort you choose to expend. But what about the whole letter thing? Isn't X a variable? Technically, the answer is no. We use letters to represent variables, since that distinguishes them from numbers, which never change. But a variable is not a letter. It's a quantity that can vary, which is usually represented by a letter. To save time, we often refer to the letter itself as a variable, but try to keep in mind it's actually the quantity represented by that letter that is really a variable. Okay, so let's move on to number 2. Which sentence makes more sense? Explain your reasoning. The amount of time you spend studying depends on the grade you earn in a course. Or, the grade you earn in a course depends on the amount of time you spend studying. If you read both of those very carefully, pause the video if you need to read them again. If you read them very carefully, B makes more sense because studying can have a positive impact on your grade. The grade you earn depends on the amount of time you spend studying. Okay. Number 3, list other factors that are likely to impact your grade in this course. This is, of course, different for everybody, but I'm just going to verbally give you some ideas. Attendance, participation, homework completion, your attitude towards the class, and there's many, many other options. I'm going to go ahead and read this now. We've got a couple of vocabulary words. It's very important that you understand the difference between a dependent variable and an independent variable. The rest of our lesson is going to be all about independent versus dependent. Because these factors can cause a change in your course grade and not the other way around, the course grade, which can vary, is referred to as a dependent variable in this situation. Other factors, like the amount of time you spend studying, are called independent variables. Independent variables can cause changes in dependent variables. Think of it as your grade depends on the factors you've identified. Okay? I usually think of it this way. The independent variable is subject to choice. You can choose how many hours you spend studying, but you can't choose the grade that you get on a quiz or a test. The grade you get depends on how much effort you put forward. So the independent variable is always subject to choice. Okay? That might not happen for every single problem that we look at, but that's a very good way to think about how to determine which one is the independent variable. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this. All right, number 4. Make sure it's in the shot there. Consider the following relationships where one quantity or event causes another to change. We're going to identify the independent and dependent variable in each case, and don't forget to think about why it makes sense that these things are variables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a little bit of space because I'm going to write a certain sentence there, but then I'm going to write I for independent variable and D for dependent variable. That way I'm just using abbreviations here. So the value of an apple, hold on one second. Oh, I just realized I started with part E. Sorry guys, let me go all the way up to part A. There we go, that's better. Independent and dependent. So this is part A. I didn't mean to start with part E. So same directions, we're just starting with part A now. The age of a tree and the height of a tree. So what I want to do is I want to write a sentence. I need to decide, does the age of the tree depend on the height of the tree? Or does the height of the tree depend on the age of the tree? Okay, I'm going to write that the height depends on the age of the tree. Okay, the height depends on the age of the tree. So whenever you're trying to determine which one is the dependent variable, it's always the one that comes before the word depends when you're writing that sentence. So since the height of the tree depends on how old it is, okay, and this is the same for people too, okay, your height depends on how old you are. The height is the dependent variable, and the age is the independent variable. Now this is an example where you can't really choose your age, but that is sort of an exception to the rule. All right, let's try part B. Okay, the number of practice sessions and the quality of musical performance. So I'm going to read it in both directions again. So the number of practice sessions depends on the quality of music, or the quality of music depends on the number of practice sessions. This is the idea of practice makes perfect, right? So how good of a performance you get or you give depends on how much you've practiced. So the quality depends on the number of practice sessions. Okay, so whatever's before the word depends is the dependent variable. The quality depends on the number of practice. So the quality of the musical performance goes there, and the number of practice sessions goes here. Okay, let's try part C. Your score on a placement test and the math course you've taken previously. Okay, so I'm going to read it in both directions again. Your score on the placement test depends on the math courses you've taken previously, or the math courses you've taken previously depend on your score on the placement test. The first way that I said it is the correct way. Your score on a placement test depends on math courses taken. That's the correct way to say it. Your score on the placement test depends on the math courses you've taken in the past. So here's the word depends. So your score on the placement test is your dependent variable. So my independent variable is the math courses taken previously. I'll just say math courses taken. And your dependent variable is your score on the placement test. Okay. All right, let's try one more on this slide, and then we'll try the next few on the next slide. All right, part D, your blood pressure and the amount of time you spend exercising each week. So I'm going to say it in both directions. Your blood pressure depends on the amount of time you spend exercising each week, or the amount of time you spend exercising depends on your blood pressure. The first way that I said it is correct. Your blood pressure depends on time spent exercising. So whatever is before the word depends is my dependent variable. So my blood pressure is my dependent variable. And the time spent exercising is my independent variable. Okay. If you're having any questions on these, just feel free to comment in Google Classroom, and I'll be happy to give you some clarification throughout the day on Wednesday if you guys are having difficulties. All right, let's look at the next section. It might be a good idea, now that we've had some practice, it might be a good idea to try these on your own. So feel free to pause the video if you want to try them without me, and then come back and press play and see if you get the same thing as me. Okay. So part E, it says the value of a share of Apple stock and what year it is. So the value of the Apple stock depends on what year it is, or the year depends on the value of the Apple stock. The first way that I said it is correct. The value of the stock depends on the year. Okay, the value of the stock depends on what year it is. So here's the word depends. So the value of the stock is before the word depends. So that means the value of the stock is our dependent variable. Value of the Apple stock. And then the number of years is going to be our independent variable. Okay, let's try part F. The number of songs a band sells on iTunes and the amount of money spent on marketing. So I'm going to read it both ways. The number of songs a band sells depends on the amount of money spent on marketing. Or I can say the amount of money spent on marketing depends on the number of songs a band sells. It's the first way that I said it. The number of songs they sell depends on how much marketing they put out there. So number of songs sold depends on marketing. So here's the word depends. Whatever comes before it is the dependent variable. So the number of songs sold is the dependent variable. And the money spent on marketing is the independent variable. Okay, let's try part G. The cost of a cab ride and the number of miles you've driven, or you're driven. So let me read it both ways. The cost of a cab ride depends on the number of miles you're driven, or the number of miles you're driven depends on the cost. Again, it's the first way that I said it. So the cost of cab ride depends on miles driven. So once again, the section before the word depends is the cost of the cab ride. That's our dependent variable. So my independent variable is miles driven, and my dependent variable is the cost of a cab ride. Okay. All right, there's one more. The number of customers that want to buy a certain product and the price of that product. So let me read it both ways. The number of customers that want to buy a certain product depends on the price of that product, or the price of that product depends on the number of customers that want to buy a certain product. So I would actually argue that it can be seen in either direction for this problem. I'm going to write down that it can be argued both ways. If you think about it, some companies will price their product based on how many people they think might buy it. So the price could depend on the number of customers. But you can think of it the other way as well. The number of customers that want to buy a product could depend on the price of that product. Okay, so it could be argued both ways in this case. Now, I can guarantee you that on a future quiz or a test, I'm not going to give you a question that can be argued both ways. I will definitely give you a question where it is clear which one is the independent and which one is the dependent. Okay. All right, so make sure you understand independent and dependent variables. Comment on Google Classroom if you have any questions. Feel free to start the homework tonight if you'd like to, but it's technically not due until Friday. We will start on Thursday with a Did You Get It about independent and dependent variables, so be prepared for that as well. Have a great rest of your day, you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.